Welcome to the presentation of AcuContainer, an AcuBoost product published by Information Integration Group. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to go over a PowerPoint presentation, which is about 5-6 pages, which will go over the product's functionality in an overview of it. Then I'll start showing you the actual demonstration of the program. So here's a list of software enhancements. So what AcuContainer does, it fills a gap from between the time you approve the PO until you receive it in your warehouse. It allows you to create container transactions, and you have the option of loading a complete PO, certain lines of a PO, or partial quantity of a PO line. To create the PO transaction, it will show you the total weight, volume of all the items that are loaded into the container transaction. It has statuses that lets you have visibility over when you're planning it, when the broker has it, when it's on the water, and so forth. Any invoice you receive for products in that container, you can enter into the container transaction. We will go ahead and allocate that cost to all the items in that container. You can even enter cost that applies to multiple containers. If your FOB is for a dock, we allow you to receive that product into an in-transit warehouse. You can have one in-transit warehouse for Acumatica setup, or you can have one per vendor or one per vendor by destination warehouse. We will let you enter a custom classification code for stock items, enter the duty and tariff by country, and we will auto-calculate the duty and tariff for you. Optionally, we will do the QC functions for you. We'll receive the product in the QC location. On the roadmap, we're working with a few companies to show you where the actual container is, both in situations where we will go to their website, the shipping lanes website, and display where the container is, as well as GPS devices that you have purchased and placed in the container. One of the other things we're doing is we're going to manage the quantities in the container, allow you to allocate them to the sales order. We'll show you what purchase orders, what quantities were created for sales orders, and give you visibility of what's available to be allocated. And once you receive it, we'll go into the sales order and load the quantities allocated. This is the preferences screen. We let you do things like auto allocating of landed cost and duty is basically optional, as well as going to the purchase order and changing the actual arrival date based on the dates that you enter into the container transaction. Same thing with the processing in transit warehouse. This is the stock item. This is the custom classification code that we've assigned to it. Here is the list of custom classification codes and where you enter the duty and the tariff by custom classification code. This is a container transaction. So as you can see, this is container tax 64, has items coming from this PO. Some other information here. There was the freight forwarder logistics service, destination port, freight forwarder company, some totals, and of course the items that are loaded in there. You also have the ability to load items from Excels into the system. We have the dates tab. A vendor, of course, is optional. There's a vendor tab that lets you enter the vendor information, but if you are receiving products from multiple containers, multiple vendors in the container, then you leave that field blank. Here's some dates. Depending on your needs, you can use all of them or some of them. Factory ready date, onboard loading, expected arrival, actual arrival, and then these are all information that we track for you, and you can have generic inquiries created that give you visibility over what's the status of each. This is your landed cost tab, so you can enter any cost that you have in here. The vendor will create the AP invoice for you if you're given us a vendor and a reference number when the product is received. If not, you basically will be able to enter and allocate them to the product. Here's in transit warehouse. So as you can see, we would create an Acumatica receipt transaction in the in-transit warehouse that you've assigned to that vendor or that vendor by destination port. That transaction is completely reversed out when you receive the product in your main warehouse. So it's a temporary posting using the PO cost into the in-transit warehouse, which completely gets reversed out when you receive the product in your main warehouse. Based on the quantities that you enter when you receive the product, will create the PO receipt transaction and let you finalize those numbers. Here we're looking at the IN transaction for the receipt postings. Tally entry, when you receive the product in the warehouse, you can enter the quantities, and this gets imported into the container transaction, and from there we create the PO receipt. Most of these things are optional. You can decide whether you want to use the tally quantities or just create purchase receipt documents when the product is received, and do the final entry of the information in the PO receipt document. Container distribution, if you have expenses that apply to multiple containers, you enter here the information and it gets allocated in the purchase receipt. Now, here we're looking at the purchase receipt transaction that gets generated, again, one per vendor that is on the transaction. Landed cost information gets created automatically for you when you release the transaction. ASO containers is also an option that I have available to you. We give you the ability, if you're transferring product from one location to the other via sales orders, we give you the ability to load products from the sales order from shipments, finalize a container, and if it goes to a customer, that will be the end of it. Otherwise, we let you generate a transaction, receiving transaction based on what's in the container in the destination warehouse. So that's a quick PowerPoint-based overview. Now we're going to look at the actual program here. So I've created 2 purchase orders for this demonstration, and we're in the container entry program. So I clicked on the plus sign. I'm adding a new container transaction. Again, vendor number is optional. If you enter the vendor number, then you can filter it and only show the POs and the PO lines that belong to that vendor. Some other information that is available to us, what's the status, maybe we do planning, whether it's inland transportation, foreign dock, custom, and so forth and so on. You can change the statuses. Country code is used when you do your basically tariff calculation and loading. Container number, freight forwarder organization, who's a freight forwarder, you can enter that. Container type, 20-footer, 40-footer, and so forth. Logistics service destination code, which is usually the port of LA, Long Beach, or San Pedro, New York, and so forth and so on. Once you're done with this information, you can load your POs, and you click on the PO dates. You can select the PO. Maybe we'll select 1 or 2 POs that I've already created. This checkbox tells us that we want to auto load all the items. When I add and close, it will load the items from those purchase orders in here. I have the quantities. Now you can modify this and either enter the partial quantity or the program when you were loading it, you can specify. You can also go through line items on the PO and then decide what quantities you want to load into the PO. That's also available to us. So far we have the container transaction. In the container transaction 65, we've told it items are coming from PO 853, 854. We can go to the landed cost tab. We'll see the custom and tariff that got auto calculated. If I come here and click on the item, I can take us to the stock item form of Acumatica and show you where the custom classification code is entered for the item, which is right here on the general tab, and where the duty and tariff is entered for that item. So here we've told it for China, it's a 10% tariff for that custom classification code. And so if you setting in the preferences is to auto calculate duty and tariff and load them, that's when the system gets that information and loads the tariff and duty here. You can enter additional costs, and you have as many of these as you want, maybe miscellaneous charges. We have $1,000 of that, and who's the vendor, a reference number, who's the vendor, we could enter that in here, and on and on. And what it would do, will allocate that also based on the landed cost type to the lines and the purchase order. So, and then the container. So here we can see basically the tariff calculated, the amount allocated of the landed cost that we've entered, the duty, and on and on. So all of this information that you enter here, any invoices that we receive, you can just come here and enter it, and we'll allocate it. As I mentioned, you can even have expenses that apply to multiple containers and enter them in the program, and we will allocate them to all the line items. So far we've entered some items, we've entered some costs. You can save it, come back and change the status, add additional items to it, and on and on, or just come in here and enter some dates. There's all kind of dates information available to us to enter, and the custom date, drainage date, main reference bill of lading number, and so of course your attachments are all tracked here. So this is all available information for us. Now, if you want to access the freight forwarder vendor, we just do things like, you know, if the freight forwarder has a website, we will quickly take you there. Other things, we'll let you print a commercial invoice, we'll let you print a bill of lading, the document itself, and so forth and so on are available to you. The next thing you do, once you have created the container, you can save it afterwards. So one of the things we do with this container transaction, now this information becomes available to you from different programs in Acumatica. If you're an Acumatica sales order entry and entering a sales order into the system and you want to look at the availability information, we would quickly show you what's available of that item. But in addition to that information that Acumatica has, we will also show you what you have in containers coming your way. So if you're entering an order and you enter right. So Acumatica, of course, has this item availability tab that would take you to the item availability. And what we do, what we've added here is containers. We will show you both at the item level what containers it has, and the container 3951. And if you click on any one of them, we'll show you what's in the container, what's in transit, if you've updated the and so forth. If you give it this location, it will also show you a lot of that information for you. So we have availability to this information. Also, if you bring up any one of the purchase orders, we will show you that purchase order by line item, how many is in each container. So again, some information for you to track. So the next thing I want to show you, if I take us to the container tracking menu, is the ability to post things into an in-transit register. So I can select the container and receive the product into an in-transit warehouse. So if I run the register, that inventory would be moved to the in-transit warehouse. And the nice thing about in-transit warehouse is now you have access and your financial reports, balance sheet, or your inventory valuation reports of Acumatica to all the information that is in this container. So if I come back to my container, this container 65, all this information will be posted into the in-transit warehouse for me. All right, so let's see what. Okay, gotta remove it off the hold, save it, and then do this. So even if I want to access it from there, I could. Otherwise, I selected 65 and select this. And if I run the register, now this quantities will post to in transit for me from this column here. I click on register. And if I select any one of these lines and click on in documents, you'll see the Acumatica transaction that got generated for receiving the product into in-transit warehouse. Again, it gets received into in-transit warehouse at the PO cost, and it will come out of the in-transit warehouse. All the quantities at the cost that got loaded into the transit warehouse would get reversed when I receive the product in my main warehouse. So we talked about having other programs like distribution entry, which gives you the ability to enter expenses that apply to multiple containers. And you can enter multiple containers and expense here, and it will apply to all the, add containers would give you the ability to add additional expenses, and those would be the notes you can enter, and those would be the containers that, the information would be loaded from. So here are your entering expenses that you're allocating to multiple containers. Next function we have is tally entry, and this is when you receive the product in the warehouse. You enter the container number that you received. It will show the quantity, the tally quantity. You save it, and what happens is when you save that information, you can receive it into the PO containers. You would do the import tally function here and receive that information. If you saved it tally for that, you'll import it. And so when you click on create purchase receipt, PO receipt gets created based on those tally entries. So now if you click on enter PO receipt, it will basically go ahead and create a PO receipt transaction for us, handing everything back over to Acumatica, so Acumatica could do its own basically updating of the inventory and so forth. So we basically bring information from the container into the PO receipt transaction. We'll create a PO receipt transaction, one per vendor that is in our document, in our container document. So basically, the landed cost also gets updated accordingly. So each container, each generated transaction would have its own landed cost allocated and created in the system. So one of the things that are other things that I wanted to mention is that if you have QC tracking set up by item in Acumatica as part of our enhancement, product, instead of getting received into the receiving location, will be received into the QC location. So let's go look at that as well, since we did this. So transfer, and the product would be received into the QC location. And once you perform the QC function by selecting the item and marking the QC function completed, the item would be auto-generated transfer transaction, moving the product from the QC location to the location that was on the PO and the purchase receipt. Thank you for the opportunity to show you our enhancement. If you have any question about these or any of our other enhancements, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.